No one should ever like say they're raising money and so far they've raised zero.
Yes.
It sounds obvious, but like I would advise like not to do that ever. No matter what, if you are raising, the round's pretty much already done. That's the narrative. Another thing as well is like product market fit is not necessarily static as well, I think. Particularly now in the AI world. You might have a PMF today, but you don't necessarily have it when you wake up. Yeah, I say that. I mean, a year ago, vibe coding was great for prototyping. I mean, now I think it's like great for production. In terms of MVPs, like the concept of saying I don't have technical resources to build an MVP is just like not true. We went from about 5K in monthly revenue to about 100K in 3 months.
Wow.
And then we kind of did that again in like the next 3 months.
That's product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I called it the product market fit question.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit. Product market fit.
I mean, the name of the show is Product Market Fit.
Do you think the Product Market Fit show has product market fit? Because if you do, then there's something you just have to do. You have to take out your phone. You have to leave the show 5 stars. It lets us reach more founders and it lets us get better guests. Thank you.
Chaz, welcome to the show, man. It's great to have you on.
Oh, man, thanks for having me.
I'm excited for this one because, you know, one of the things about startups is regardless of how kind of big they get, you never know how much is skill, how much is luck. But, you know, you look at your background, you've got the first company you started was acquired for like over 40 million. The second company was acquired for much more than that. And the third company, which is the one we're talking about today, ModelML, is off to like a start faster than those other two, just raised 75 million. So it's on the right track. So I think there's some magic, some serious skill set to be uncovered here today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure, but we'll see.
I don't expect you to say anything other than humility after that. But I think anybody looking from the outside says, okay, there's got to be something going on here. So that's what we're going to try and pull at today. Maybe let's start with a little bit of background, right? But more than anything, like tell us about, you know, that first company, Fat Llama, started in 2016. What was happening in 2015, just before? What was the origin story? And we'll get into that story and kind of go from there.
Yeah, so I suppose like a lot of founders, right? Like I was, you know, young. I was like obsessed with things like YC. I was obsessed with like the concept of building a company. You know, I was definitely in that phase of like just trying to figure out an idea in my head that I like wanted to do, right? So that's kind of where it started. And I kind of stumbled across, or we did this concept of like lending out items to people nearby. And we just like jumped in with 2 feet, you know, self-taught and just got cracking and did everything wrong as well, I should say.
Where was this, by the way? Where were we based?
In London. So at this point, I was in London. Arn's my brother. I built the company with as well. He was in London. We did end up, so we that company, so we got on YC, which, you know, in many respects in 2016, that was like very much the heyday. And, you know, that was a breakthrough for us, really. You know, we were put on a map as like people from England just, you know, wanting to build a software business, to be honest.
Things have globalized a lot more lately, but, you know, Bay Area obviously is still kind of the center of all things tech. And for me, when I started Gym Track 2013, similar vintage, we got into 500 startups, also in SF. And it was night and day before and after being from Ottawa, which is a, you know, small town, much less important globally than London, but still from the tech perspective, these are not first tier cities in either case, certainly not back then at least. And so I can imagine kind of what that would have done to you, like how you look at yourself and how everybody else looked at you back home.
For sure. And like, we didn't take any of it for granted either. That definitely made our journey easier, for sure. I mean, for what we needed to do, we needed to raise a bit of money, you know, made a lot of those things easier. I'd say that one of the things that we don't talk about enough was like, you know, between starting and getting on YC, we raised £1 million. And that was like straight scrappiness. I remember we actually raised 2 rounds, a £100,000 round and then a £1 million round. And that first £100,000 round, I figured out that it was just like a numbers game. I was like, look, to go at this full time, I'm happy to. I was living off like, you know, £1,300 a month. I was like, to go at this full time, I'm just going to need to scrap and it's going to be a numbers game. So I kind of figured, I was like, look, where is money in London? It's a lot of it is like financial services centric. You know, a lot of those companies are based in Canary Wharf down there. I'm just going to go down there and I'm just going to hit people up on LinkedIn. I mean, looking back on it, I was like pitching for like $1,000 at a time, like genuinely.
No way.
$2,000 here and there. And I'd do like 10 pitches of this, like to everyone else is like a ridiculous idea as well. I was like, yeah, you're going to lend out your items to people nearby and you're going to be okay with that, strangers, you know? So I'd do like 10 pitches and pick up a couple of grand here and there, but the numbers added up, and then we got to 100 grand. And then before you know it, look, we're in a position where I could leave my other job and kind of go out at full time.
This is an interesting tangent to go down because obviously raising the first round is always a big deal. And, once you have a track record and stuff, frankly, it gets a lot easier. But when you don't, like in that time, it is not easy at all. How did you even get those, 10 meetings a day? You got to get 10 meetings a day. It's one thing to do them. It's hard work, but getting them is like a dark science sort of thing. Like, how did you get those meetings every day and kind of have that volume?
Well, I should say, before explaining that as well, right? I do think the playbook in the context of AI has changed drastically. I'll park that a little bit. We can come back to that. But to answer your question, I really believe that first round as a first-time founder, if that's something you even need to do anymore, right? These really small rounds that used to happen a lot more, it's a numbers game. It's a pure numbers game. And for a whole bunch of reasons, you need to learn how to pitch. The only way to learn is to fail and fail quickly.
Reps, yeah.
So I was, hitting people up on LinkedIn and maxing my messages and ads like every single day, right? Like every day. And the thing is, the conversion rate would be tiny, right? You'd probably have to like connect with 100 and then maybe message all 100 and get 10 responses to maybe get one meeting, but it compounds. So I think like the thing that I thought looking back on it that was really useful is, although that overall, let's call it £1 million, if that's what it was, I can't remember exactly, probably only 5-10% of that came direct from those LinkedIn messages I was sending. The other 90% was indirectly, almost entirely through that, right? Because, at the end of the day, if you're meeting one person, you're not meeting just them, you're meeting everyone else that they know. And I always said that to myself. And that's how I ended up compounding. We had one or two quite lucky intros. Well, I say lucky, it was a numbers game, so maybe it was just statistical significance. I don't know.
Did you do the comment, like especially that early on, oh, I'm a student, want your advice, et cetera, et cetera? Or was it like very direct, like, hey, I'm fundraising?
I was very direct. I think in that first message, a big part of it is credibility. So I think like, how can you in that first 3 or 4 words get some level of credibility? Is it a name drop? Maybe it's where you studied. If you studied somewhere, great.
Do you remember what you did? What was your kind of credibility tagline?
There was a couple of people that I approached and I asked whether they would be advisors. So I was like, hey, can you just help me out? And they themselves were like quite reputable. I think in the first line, I said something along the lines of like, hey, I've started this new company, already got advisors from, Airbnb and whatever and Uber. This is what we do, keen to chat, No one should ever like say they're raising money and so far they've raised 0.
Yes.
It sounds obvious, but like I would advise like not to do that ever, right? In other words, like no matter what, if you are raising, the round's pretty much already done. That's the narrative.
Yes.
I'll explain the reality in this, but like no one wants to be that first check. So that first check is going to come from an ally or someone that you know, right? And so they're the ones going to take the leap of faith. But yeah, you always want to be on the tail end.
I actually did it by accident because we thought we needed only like 200K and then we thought we needed only 500K. But the effect of it was we were always almost done because it was like, oh, we got 100K out of 200, so we're 50%. And then we're like, we're going to need more money. Well, you know what? We got 300 out of 500. And so you always got that momentum going.
That's what people should do, is whatever their first check is in the round, just say your total round is that plus like 20%.
Yes. And the other thing you mentioned there that I think is really important is, bootstrapping is known as like, you don't raise any money. But I think there's an element in bootstrapping, whether you go VC or not, which is how do you do the little thing? You have this goal of raising $1 million and you're like, that seems insurmountable. Okay, well, maybe raising 100K is easier to this point. Maybe raising any money is too hard, but maybe getting an advisor is not that hard. And then getting an advisor can lead to those meetings, can lead to so it's like like these little things that then get you to that big thing, right? You got to break it down.
Everything compounds, first of all. So like everything seems like a really steep hill, right? But it's like anything, to get to your first, I don't know, even 100K and ARR when you're first time might seem huge, but when you're there, to get to like 1 million maybe doesn't seem that far, and I think like anything, it's these little steps. I think the big thing is consistency. And the second thing, we mentioned it, Hans and I, when we did this YC interview, that's on YouTube, around perseverance. So like, I think there is a big difference between blind perseverance, but if something like makes sense and it makes sense and you're not kidding yourself, I mean, you just got to go at that with like all guns blazing.
It's this weird balance because on the one hand, I've seen a lot of people spend a lot of time on something that's just like probably never going to work and then ultimately doesn't work. And they're like, wow, I wish I made a huge change way earlier. But on the other hand, even the ones that are successful had to go through a lot of shit until they saw that success. So you've got to figure out if the thing you're going after is like real somehow. But even if it is, unless you get really lucky, it's not just going to be up and to the right. You're going to go eat a lot of shit to get there.
An easy sort of cheat code there is like, again, slightly different now with AI, but like if you have no competition and you've like never had any competition, it's like you still have no competition. You probably don't have anything that people want, right? And I think like it's astounding to me, but I say it's astounding. I mean, I was the same. It's like you have this like inherent fear for competition. I think particularly as a first-time founder, it's like you see competition, big company or small company, by the way, building what you're building, and there's just like this anxiety that builds up inside you, right? You're like, it's over, right? I think that what you realize second and third time is like, that is exactly what you need, because there's just more and more folks validating your concept, right? And if you validated your concept, then all you need to do is execute better. And it's way easier to execute better than it is to find a concept that works.
So going back to the storyline for Fat Llama, I mean, you get into YC. YC will make fundraising a lot easier, but it doesn't make finding product market fit easier. And this is not an easy path that you've chosen around lending, like a lending marketplace. What's that story?
So interestingly, our first two companies were both consumer. Fat Llama took probably 3 years to find product market fit. Fancy that we sold to GoPuff, was like day one, day zero, right? So very different stories, and we've seen them both from different lenses. And so come back to this point of perseverance. We knew deep down that what we were building, people wanted. What we didn't know was whether we could do that in a way where the unit economics adds up, right? And I think like that's hard, right? Because, often as founders, you're like, well, yeah, but when we scale, people will know who we are and we won't have this CAC or whatever it is. And there's always this like in the future type thing. That's a really hard spot to be in. But again, we kind of persevered on the basis that we knew people wanted this, and that was true. And we did scale, and we raised, we got on YC, raised a $12 million Series A pretty quickly after that. But it took us a good year or so after our Series A for the unit economics to add up. But we kind of knew we needed to persevere.
How many like cities did you end up kind of scaling to?
So it was less so the geographical expansion for us. It was more the category expansion. That was like a bit of a thing that we really need to think about. So our product, it was very simple. You lend out a camera, some gardening equipment, a set of DJ decks, a guitar. It's to someone nearby, and we take commission, right? It's a marketplace. That was it. You'd be insured. That was like the thing that we ended up somewhat mastering in a scrappy way to start with, for sure. And so I think that what we didn't know was we knew how big it was in, say, film photography as a category, but we didn't know how big it was and how we could get into other markets in using the same way that we did before. And so what happened was it was just very unpredictable in that sense, because it wasn't like we had one thing that we just knew we could scale geographically. We had this concept of category scaling and geographical scaling. That was difficult.
How big did it get, like revenue-wise, more or less, by the time you sold it?
I think when we sold it, it was about, I might be speaking out of turn here, but just under $1 million a month in GMV, like there or thereabouts. So big as in like Series B big? Well, no. Series A big? Yeah, it was good. But also it was kicking out cash. So like another thing as well, we hit product market fit and the business was like cash flow positive. So that was fun, but we didn't really, it was harder to then grow from that. Another thing as well is like product market fit is not necessarily static as well, I think, particularly now in the AI world.
Yes.
You might have a PMF today, but you don't necessarily have it when you wake up.
Well, and the easy answer to that, I mean, the market's always changing. So if the market changes, the PMF you might have had no longer is true.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell me the story. I mean, selling companies is not ever easy and not linear. Like, how did it happen for you at Fat Llama? Who bought it and why? Kind of what's that story?
So not many people know this, right? But we, pre the acquisition, we spent 6-9 months exploring a SPAC where we were going to, with a bunch of other companies, take the company public. We were kind of the lead company in that, not because I think we were the biggest, but more because we had a good brand.
And this was the SPAC post-COVID era, like late 2020-ish?
Yeah, earlier than that. But this is like when I think the news online is late, but it was pre that. But that was hard. Like, I think, we spent over $500,000 in legal fees and, 9 months of work, me in the middle of the night, all the time with my laptop on my knees, 2-3 weeks before Christmas, the whole thing just fell out of bed. And like, I think as a first time founder, what was the hardest then was picking up the phone to the shareholders and being like, look, I made a call, we went in this direction and I fucked it up. It wasn't that we made any mistakes. I think it was just that as founders, and shareholders back you to go in a certain direction. Like I found that tough.
And was that harder for you, especially at that age, than the money you probably assumed you would make if it happened? Like, was that top of mind for you, or even back then it wasn't?
No, honestly, no. I feel Arnie and I, in the grand scheme of things, have never really been like to an extent like that motivated by money. And even if you are, it really does get boring quick. And like you realize that having a purpose and kind of a sense of fulfillment like every day is harder to find, first of all, and is way more important. It was really just that feeling of letting people down. And although I, worked my ass off and we did everything correct and everyone would have made the same decision, even looking back on it, I think as a founder, particularly as a first-time founder, during that journey, you just put so much weight on your shoulders, right? And it's difficult to then be like, yeah, I fucked up.
How'd you go from there to exiting?
Well, that was almost like maybe the perfect turnaround. I won't go into too many details of, who called me and when in terms of mentioning them by name, but I was in a seaside town in England and I got this call from this Swedish number and I ignored it and they kept calling me. I think looking back on it, what happened was they were interested in acquiring us and knew that this SPAC was going on. And so the second that they heard it fell through, like my phone was blowing up. And it was a much, much better outcome. I mean, I don't want to talk financially, and that's sort of confidential to everyone involved, but it really was for our customers, shareholders, us personally, it was a better outcome. And, the business now is in great hands doing great things.
Oh, so it's still operating, like this lending marketplace still exists?
It's funny. It only just as in the last couple of weeks in the UK, which is where the bulk of the business was, got rebranded to this new business. But even today, I was in this, we did some photo shoot for something at the business, and all the equipment that the person was renting there was rented through Fat Llama, which feels good. And also, the amazing thing about our business is like it's a really rewarding story, right? Because what it did to so many creatives was unlock their ability to their passion full time. And I genuinely, there's probably hundreds of thousands of people that business changed people's lives for the better, and I've never met them, right? And that's why it was such a great business, I think, in the end to be involved with and still involved with.
When did you sell that? And then when did you start your next company, Fancy?
So 2019, and then end of 2019, Arns and I, so my brother and I, we kind of just thought it'd be cool if you could order groceries on your phone. I wouldn't necessarily say there was more to it than that. We were like, wanted to build something. We thought that would be cool. And just like polar opposite to the first business. Like we launched with like, to call it an MVP was like an overstatement. It was almost like a WhatsApp group. It was so bad of an app. So it was a native app.
And what city did you choose to launch in?
Newcastle. Again, a bit of a fluky part to the whole story. So Arns was CEO and we decided to launch in Newcastle. One reason, Newcastle, for the listeners, whether they know or not, is like a tiny little town. Actually, people from Newcastle would probably get upset with that. It's a town in the far northeast of England. That is an amazing town or city, but quite small. It's a bit of a university town as well. And yeah, we launched up there. So it was very much a case of like coding during the day and then would kind of open up. Mainly in the evening was when the orders came in. So like from 6 onwards, deliver orders until midnight.
Did you guys do the first deliveries or did you partner with someone right away?
The team is in the founding team, did the first like 1,400 deliveries. We didn't know this at the time, but one of the things that, Arnie always says this, that was so amazing was obviously if you're doing the deliveries, you're getting the most real-time user feedback that you can possibly get because you're literally, you're meeting every single user every time they make an order in person. So it's almost like you have customer interviews for every order, which helped us iterate and build so much quicker. But yeah, the model was originally, obviously we were vertically integrated, right? In other words, like it was, we had the warehouse, we had the stock, etc. But we didn't have anything beyond the app. So we were like getting orders. We were like going down to the corner shop. We were buying like cigarettes and vodka and then like delivering them.
And you would pay yourself and then get paid later? Like you didn't have a partnership with the stores where you were buying stuff?
No way. Yeah, there was just like, we had nothing. But this is the thing, right? We learned from the first business. We were like, we literally said to ourselves, and also I think it was Michael Seibel, as in YC, Michael Seibel, he said to me, he said, a proper MVP is like, it is a WhatsApp group, and that's the way that you should think about it. We applied this and we were like, look, we're not going to spend any money. We're not going to do anything. We're going to write code, right? We're going to stand outside these student halls or whatever. We're going to hand out some flyers. We're going to get an order. There's no back end, by the way, right? So it's a text message that we got the order, right, that we hooked up to Twilio. And everybody's going to go to the shop. We're going to buy it and we're going to take it to them. And if they order again, the unit economics add up, then great. But that's like how it started. But it just grew quickly, pre-COVID, right? So we quickly got to like hundreds and then thousands of orders a day with no marketing, right? So it was a referral-based thing and sticky, and just so different to the first company.
I'm going to ask you for a small favor, a tiny little favor. In fact, it's not even, now that I think about it, it's not even really a favor for me. I'm actually trying to help you do a favor for you. Just hit the follow button. You won't miss out on the next episode. You'll see everything that we release. If you don't want to listen to an episode, you just skip it, but at least you don't miss out.
And you mentioned like competitive landscape earlier. Was GoPuff already doing this in the US? Like, did you get inspired by others doing it in different cities and you brought it to Newcastle?
So no, GoPuff already existed in the US. We didn't know them because they were in stealth mode, really. So there was no like press about them or anything. They were still in stealth mode at that point. They were doing pretty well in the US. We launched in Newcastle again for just like small town, easy to get around.
So it wasn't like you saw somebody doing it in a different market and you brought it to the UK market.
And no, and I think in that respect, like it was just lucky. I think it was just like, hey, we think this is like kind of cool, as a concept. Like, would you want this? Yeah, okay, well, let's just build it. And by the way, now with AI as well, like I said to someone the other day, our MVP probably took a month to build. Again, no back end. It was just an app that you could like choose from a selection of maybe like 30 different items. Also, I remember we literally hooked up the items database to a Google Sheet. And even the image of the item was being pulled from like an image URL on the Google. So we weren't even hosting the images. It was just like some random image online. It was a real piece of, I don't think we didn't have payments in the beginning. Like, people paying cash. It was just boom, you ordered, we got a text message and that was it.
It's the ultimate test of product market fit. And it's not so much like if you can give them a shitty product, they still use it. It's just like, do they care about the optimization piece and like the bells and whistles, or do they just want the thing, right? In that case, they just want to deliver like groceries delivered. And like, yeah, if the thing doesn't look that good and it doesn't work like perfectly, that's fine because I'm still getting my groceries delivered, and that proves the core thing.
Exactly. But sorry, the point I was going to make there was like that MVP in today's world would take a day.
Right.
And so I think that says to a couple of things. I think it's like that thing I mentioned around competition. So like, ultimately, if there is no competition and there's no competition for a while, you probably don't have a market. And the other thing of just like, you should be able to validate concepts just far quicker. Yeah, I say that. I mean, a year ago, vibe coding was great for prototyping. I mean, now I think it's like great for production. So in terms of MVPs, like the concept of saying I don't have technical resources to build an MVP is just like not true.
Yeah, no, it's 100% gone. It makes that experimentation piece so much faster. And it's interesting because I think a lot of especially for the technical founders out there, like a lot of the building, I was just talking to one the other week, like is almost a defense mechanism. Like they're comfortable there building and so they don't launch it. That excuse is like gone. You can't even say that to yourself. It's like you got to go out and launch and see what happens.
Yeah. And also, when you're in production these days, anything that was on kind of like, if you rewind back, if you take the business day, you put it back 3 years, that nice to have product list now becomes a need to have. There's no concept of like the speed that you need to ship. Obviously as the barriers to entry get lower, That means there's more competition. It means like, there's going to be more products in the market. You just need to ship so much faster. Come back to that point of like product market fit in the AI world. It's just like, it's just not static. You might not have it in the morning.
So just to wrap up the fancy story, they're ultimately acquired by GoPuff. Did they come to you? Did you go to them? And same kind of idea, like where was the business at more or less by the time that happened?
We were out raising 100 million. So the business in 12 months was flying.
That's crazy.
We went from 0 cities to I think 15 cities in about 6 months. And even if you just think about that operationally, right?
I was going to ask, how many people? Like,
this is a business where you needed a warehouse to operate, right? So that's 15 warehouse leases, like signed and negotiated. You need to stock the warehouse. So every city had to have the appropriate local suppliers. But the demand was there. And I think at acquisition, I would guess about 70 or 80 people, I think, but I'm not 100% sure, around that sort of number. In the head office, obviously, if you include drivers and warehouse staff, it would have been maybe even, 500 people, maybe more, including drivers. I don't know, but a big number, comparatively speaking. Yes, we're raising around, and, Arnie, he got introduced to the founders of GoPuff, and they were great. And I think the timing for them was great. The nature, obviously, of our business as well, because for those that remember that market, it was very, very competitive. Obviously, COVID compounded it, and people were going out and raising like $20 million seed rounds, but they were all focusing on like the bigger cities. What we did by fluke was we were before anyone else, which was lucky. But we also, again, another fluke that happened was we were focusing on these smaller, like tier 2 cities where there was no competition. So I think, look, if I was playing it back, and I was in their shoes and GoPuff shoes, I assume they were looking for a European or UK-based company. And we had the best numbers by way of size, but also by way of kind of unit economics and retention, because we are focusing on cities with, just far, far, far less competition. And look, they came along, I said, everyone did very well. I think them as well. I'd hope that if they look back on it, it was really a great decision from them. They won the UK market because of it. They're the biggest, if not the only now player in the UK market. But it was stressful. The thing is with that is, we're raising around, the burn rate of that business was huge just because, you had to really subsidize riders, it was called in that market. You're literally running out of money. There's no two ways. If you're going out to raise a round and you ditch that explodes, and you're raising, or you're doing an acquisition, you're running out of money, and you're running out of money fast. And so it was super stressful. But looking back on it though, it was like, I remember this call that we had with the legal team at like 2, 3 a.m., and all the signatures had landed, and, the signatures have been released. And it's like, you're there with like closest group of like, because everyone at the company, we're our only friends because we've only hung out with each other for like 12 months. That feeling is just like, you do that 2 or 3 months all over again because you're there, you're looking around, everyone's made a bit of money. Yeah, it's just shattered as well. I think like as the adrenaline is like coming down, it was awesome.
Yeah. And did you go work at GoPuff, or was it like a clean ending? Like you sign and you're kind of done?
So my brother Arnie, so he was in engineering there. So he stayed on for 3 years. He wanted to, enjoyed it, learned a lot, great business. He made some great friends and stuff. I then stepped out entirely. I was doing a lot of, off the back of the acquisitions, we started to invest a bit. And that's kind of how the next business ended up being started.
Yeah. So now we can dive into kind of what you're doing today, which is ModelML. What's the origin story there?
Well, for those 3 years, so we set up a small family office type setup where, given Arnie was only 21, I was probably 27. We were like, well, we don't want to just like give our money to like a wealth manager and just do nothing with our day. What are we going to do with our day? Well, why don't we invest our own money? Which was a great decision in hindsight, in the sense that like, you learn so much, right? Like, although there was advisors, investment banks, and even one private equity bid, and obviously we had that thing with Fat Llama where we looked to SPAC the business. So we learned a lot about investing in the world of finance, basically. It helps. I studied accounting, but I didn't really know much prior to any of that. So we did that, and we hired people to run our own money, right? So that's what we were doing, and we were investing across, I always say when I speak to a variety of strategies, but the actual thing is, looking back on it, is we were just investing in like anything, right? Anything we thought was like cool, it would make money, and we wanted to like allocate risk like proportionally. We were kind of just doing like anything, right? And so,
do you think, was it smart? Do you think, like looking back, or was it like naive where you thought, because getting alpha in any asset class is like very hard to do. You need edge and you need all this stuff, assuming you assume like rational market and all that stuff. Like, were you just like diving into stuff and looking back, you're like, "Fuck, I can't believe like it worked," or what's the...
Put it like this, if you're asking whether we made money doing it, no. On balance, no. But we didn't lose money. But we did make some money on some things. And then we did do some great investments in a couple of things. But generally speaking, like, we weren't making any money, right? So why are we doing it? I think so we were spending a lot of our day, writing software to make that process better in one way or another. So either more efficient, or we were trying to get to a level of insight quicker. And I spent so much of my time just thinking of things that we could work on next, like as brothers, right? So Arnie must have got so fed up with me. I mean, he had a full-time job, and every 2 minutes I'm like pitching him on like this new idea.
So you actively wanted to start another startup with him?
Yeah, hell yeah. This is so boring. So we were kind of writing software, a bit of a day job. And then like there was all sorts of like different ideas, and like we'd invest in things and we were like learning as we would go. And then we noticed that the idea that we should be working on full time was like the idea that was literally staring us in the face, which was the software that we were writing for ourselves to improve our own investment decision-making process was great, and people wanted that, right? So that's how it started. And then, we met a few people that, were very senior in finance, a bunch of CEOs of the largest banks in the world, and, a bunch of really well-known private equity investors and so on. And they were like, hey, yeah, what's that? Like, this is pretty cool. Like, can we use that? Or like, how do I get hold of that? And then, one thing leads to another. And then we were like, hey, we obviously have to go at this full time. The more time we then spent thinking about the value that we would bring to an actual customer, particularly when AI started to explode, because then, LLMs are really what took the software from being, frankly, not intelligent to intelligent. It was a no-brainer. So the truth of the matter is, like, it got to maybe end of 24 time, and like we were kind of pushed out the door just based on customers wanting to use the product. And yeah, that's how it started.
It's, very similar to the kind of like Toby Shopify story, right? Where he builds like this e-commerce store so he can sell snowboards, and like the snowboards are okay, but the store everybody wants.
Exactly. Because the thing is as well is like where it was, and to a certain extent where it is, it's a productivity tool. So it wasn't necessarily making us better investors, but it was making us more productive.
What did it do? That was my main question. Yeah, like what exactly was the product?
It was basically, we would receive an opportunity. So, and when I say an opportunity, anything. It could be to invest in a startup. It could be to invest in a fund. It could be like some random co-investment. It could be like a bunch of like stocks. It could be anything, right? And we'd get these opportunities through a whole variety of different avenues. We'd get them via email. And like there's a bunch of things that you do really, really quickly as a human to validate those things. Now, almost all of that information that you do to validate is not in the materials you received, because what you've received is a sales pitch. It's sales materials. They're not going to tell you the bad things or the things that you might quickly get you to an answer early on, right? They're just trying to get you to like pick up the phone or get on a call or potentially be interested. So we basically set up this, well, then we were just referring to as like automatically calling functions. Now you would call them an agent, but it would receive an email, it would look at the opportunity, and it would go and then do a bunch of things. So for example, if you, and maybe relatable to this audience, if you receive an opportunity to invest in a startup, right? One of the very, very first things that you do is you look at who is running the startup, and you might see whether you've got like any connections in common with that particular individual on something like LinkedIn, right? And you can get to that answer programmatically. So an example might be, I would receive a deck, and if that's one of the first things I do, I don't want to look at the deck. I just want to ping Joe Blogs on, WhatsApp. Hey, just got this opportunity. What do you think of, James Smith, right? Or whatever it is. And so it was just building automations off the back of what you'd receive that could enrich the data that you'd ultimately got via email. So either via different data points, the example of like connections in common, things in the news. If it was a consumer company, you may have loads of bad reviews on Trustpilot or equivalent. Or if it's a fund or a new GP, are they posting strong political views on Twitter? I don't know. There was a lot of things that you could do. So that's where it started, and it just got more sophisticated. So it wouldn't just give you the bullet points, it would actually create you like a Word doc or a PowerPoint presentation of the opportunity that you could really quickly like get ramped up on and then quickly roll it in or out. So that's where it started. And for better or for worse, I mean, that's kind of what the product does today. We call it a workflow automation product for finance, but it basically is doing that, predominantly being used for the automation of the creation of materials. So Word, PowerPoint, Excel, etc., particularly things that folks in finance are doing on a repetitive basis.
So it's kind of like, I mean, like data enrichment, I guess, is the primary piece. When you mentioned the WhatsApp part of it, does it actually go out and reach out to people for you, or it just tells you like, hey, you know these people, maybe you want to reach out and then you can do it on your own?
I think it's heading that way. So being quite clearer how the product has evolved and what it is we do. So we describe ourselves as an AI workflow product for financial services. In other words, an AI workflow builder specifically for financial services. Now, what that actually means in practice is, number one, well, what is financial services? Our customers are predominantly, banks, very large consultancies, and we include kind of big four in that, and then asset managers.
But it's very much an enterprise product.
Enterprise only. I mean, all the way to the extent now we, partly due to the demand, partly to do with the way that our business model is evolving, we don't really look at customers that are going to be spending any less than maybe $250,000 a year with us.
Gotcha.
Just based on what we do. Now, again, when we say what we're good at, it's really material creation and verification. The verification one's interesting. So it's if you already have an output, you would go and verify that before sending it to someone. You can use really, really clever agentic systems to do that in an incredibly sophisticated way.
Walk me through that a little bit more, like verifying what exactly?
So under the hood, there's going a little bit technical, is there's 3 different agentic systems. One that goes and gathers all the information that you would need in order to create some kind of output. When I say output, I just think an email, a Slack message, all the way through to like PowerPoint, Word, Excel outputs. Think very complicated. So don't think 2-pager. Think like 200-page PowerPoint presentation, graphs, tables, charts, logos with like all the Excel backup files, and then verification. Now, the reason, interesting, the agentic systems are built in that way is that's exactly the same way that humans go through their we call it the cognitive flow, right? So as a human, when you initiate a task in your head, you gather data either already in your head, or you would go to the different things that you can access on your laptop or phone. You would put that together in something, and then you would check it, and then you would go to the next thing. In some cases, send things out as an example. That's what the agentic systems do, right? But where that's being used a lot is the automation of the creation of the material and the verification of the material. So on the creation, if you think about a lot of where the time goes, particularly more junior members of the team at these sorts of companies, is they are spending, these guys, you're doing 14, 15, 16-hour days quite often at these types of firms. And if you study where the time is going, it's not going in like what we would think as like strategy or critical thinking or analysis or anything like that. It's literally going at like creating a PowerPoint presentation or writing an email. In other words, you already have the information, you're just putting it together and repackaging it and sending out. And so that has been very popular. And I think the timing of us coming to market in terms of the sophistication of the models and everything else was, again, I think quite lucky.
Tell me about getting that first customer. I mean, you mentioned it got pulled out of you. Walk me through that story. Like, how did that all come about? So
that was of one of those customers that were like, hey, you should do this full time. They came on as a design partner.
And this was a what, by the way? I don't need the name necessarily, but is it a bank? It's a, what is it?
A small advisor. It's a small investment bank. They came on as a design partner along with another firm quite quickly. And I think that's the way to go. So I would say as a playbook for B2B companies, you almost can't overestimate what a good design partner can do to speed up your iteration cycle. And I think, something that Arnie and I have learned, if I would say there's like a couple of things that are in the founder playbook in our head, is like perseverance is definitely one. But another thing is just the speed at which you can learn. Like, I don't just mean as an individual, I actually kind of mean about your customers, right? And how you can translate that to the product. So, when I speak to people, if you've got a design partner that you're speaking to once a week, you're almost certainly going to fail, right? If you've got a design partner that you are working from their office and ideally sat next to them, you're almost certainly going to succeed. In a world, by the way, where there's no kind of barrier to entry when it comes to like writing code or technology in general.
It's funny you mentioned that, like Legora, which we just had on, became, I think it's like a 1.8 billion company in 2 years, exactly like that, right? Like was in the office with the law firm for the design partner phase. And a huge change in that speed of put something out, get some feedback, the nuances, the qualitative stuff, like it just...
Yeah, if people hadn't, I assume, I don't know who that was, but if it was Max, Max is
yes.
Max is an absolute genius.
Yeah, he's a G. He's an absolute G.
I think the way, and again, Max, I think the way that a lot of these AI application companies, their themes as to how they've gone from, 0 to 1 and beyond, they are very, very similar. I think the design partnership phase is mission critical. The speed of iteration is mission critical. I think the work ethic is also super important, particularly when the market gets validated. If you think about that, really your only tools are the speed at which you ship product and the speed at which you iterate. That's really it. That's like kind of your only competitive advantage, to be honest.
So I'm assuming you worked from the office of this design partner.
Yeah.
And were they a paid partner? Like, how did you structure that? And how did you make sure that they were going to give you X amount of time a day? Or was it just like a friendly relationship? Like, what's the structure?
So really good question. I would say as well, I don't think there's like a right or a wrong. And I also appreciate that everything I'm about to say is in an ideal world, and founders ultimately just have to play the cards that they have in front of them. But if they could choose, I think that paying is nice, but it's only a way to validate one very important thing, which is how serious they are about what it is that you are doing. Now, the reason I said that kind of caveat beforehand is that ultimately, if you're just doing anything to get a design partner, you'll take anything. And learning something is better than learning nothing. But in an ideal world, you would get that individual or company invested in the company. And we did that, by the way. So this company invested in the company. And the reason is because you get that additional level of buy-in. Now, given some verticals, that may not be possible, but you definitely want to make sure that from the very, very top, the person that's actually making the decisions of the firm, they are 100% bought in. You've also got to be mindful of like a lot of people, a lot of CEOs, particularly, particularly if they've made money, they can be quite flighty. In other words, they get excited about all sorts of things. And so you really test whether this is like absolute buy-in. But you can also make a mistake. You might choose one, it might not work, you move on to another, but it's just the speed that you go through that. But when you find one that's willing to give you really, really, really good feedback and that can help you iterate and enable you to focus in the way that you want to, yeah, you just build as quickly as you can.
It's hard to know and appreciate the difference between having that qualitative advice all the time and what that could do to product before and after you've actually done it. But can you share, do you remember anything specific that they said, or even just an outcome of the fact that you had this where it's like, we would not have built this thing this way if it wasn't for them. And as a result, the product market fit was so much stronger. Like, do you have any of those kind of examples you could share?
I don't exactly, but what I do remember is, particularly in the AI world, because these demos can be so good, so quick. A demo kind of counts for nothing. Like, real feedback is not when you are showing the user the product or what they can do. Real feedback is where they are using it, and ideally by themselves, right? Because people naturally, in front of people, they smile. Particularly, I think in Europe, like there's this culture of like everyone says everything is great when in fact it might be awful. I think in the US, they're way better for just saying how it is a lot of the time. So that's what you want to monitor. And by the way, that may also not be in what they say, it may be in the data as well, right? So like, I would say that really, really pay attention to actually how much they're using the product, because like usage just doesn't lie. It's, how amount of times you would hear a user say, this is great, happened to us for the first like 3 months, but they're not using it. Well, it's clearly not great if they're not using it. You know what I mean?
Like, what were you waiting for? When did you know when it was ready to launch? Like, what was that trigger? And then how did you structure the actual like launch beyond design partners?
In true kind of Y Combinator fashion, we just like, as soon as we even had close to a product, we were like launched and we were going out and doing as much as we could. I think we made a bet with, in the way that we were thinking about it, that was, given the procurement cycles of our industry, 6, 9, 12 months at a minimum type numbers. We knew how quickly the product was going to evolve. So we almost had to sell like 3-6 months in advance. Because if we were selling what we had today, we were never going to get ahead. But there was this point where it's so hard to describe. It's that tipping point of product market fit. People start using the product by themselves. Getting people to pay was less of a pain. People would pay and then you would never really speak to them and they would just continue using the product. And it starts to happen. But when that happens, you got to turn the tap on. You got to put the running spikes on and you got to be prepared for almost no sleep. I mean, as I mentioned, before, like first year we were 997, whole year, every waking hour, frankly, because it was a big TAM. We knew that. And we knew it was going to be competitive. And we also knew, and I think the legal AI space is a great example of this. You mentioned Agora, is that once you hit escape velocity in a market like this, it's very, very, very difficult for anyone else to then join that group, right? And basically, I use escape velocity with a very clear definition. Escape velocity is where, 12 months or so ago, it was a risk to use ModelML. I now think in some markets, it's a risk to not use ModelML. That's escape velocity. And I think like when you get in that pack, it's very difficult now for other folks to join. And it's exactly what happened in the lead AI market, just by the fact that you're compounding, right? You raise more money, you can build more product.
How fast did you get to like $1 million ARR?
We went from about $5K in monthly revenue to about $100K in 3 months.
Wow.
And then we kind of did that again in like the next 3 months. Things moved fast. Also, when you've got contracts that are scaling, given the types of organizations like us, a big part is like, as soon as you land them, you're going to build from there.
What would say is like the when you think about go-to-market for enterprise, what's worked best for you? Like whether it was around launch or whether it's about today, like what is the thing that from a sales playbook, go-to-market perspective, you think is like comes top of mind?
Think about it. It's like you have to go into things, in my view, of your product is not unique. In other words, like the person that you are pitching has probably seen 10 other products that look like your product. I mean, this is very relevant in 0 to 1. I think beyond that, it becomes quite different. Now, so where do you differentiate or how do you differentiate? I think a big thing, admittedly, I think this is very important in our market, unless you're another product, is trust and credibility. Because if you think about the buyer, they have to latch on to something that sets you aside from the other 50 AI tools that they've now seen, right? And in our market, that was trust and credibility. We ended up bringing on a bunch of like really, really senior advisors to the business that became also close friends to myself personally and the business. That was really, really helpful. That was a way to differentiate. I think now though, look, the way I look at businesses once you've got past that point, I think this is super important in the context of product market fit not being static. What I mean by that is like, if you look at our risk this year, right? I won't mention the number we have in the bank, but we've just raised a big round of 75. We raised 15 before and we basically spent no money, right? So what is our risk? Well, there's kind of two elements of risk in any business of this stage. Do you have product market fit? And are you one of those companies that's, in escape velocity? I think that we are definitely one of those companies at escape velocity. And today we have product market fit. So what is our risk? Well, our risk is, as I mentioned just then, is like, we may not have product market fit tomorrow morning, right? And that's not based on like OpenAI or Anthropic or these guys. It's just based on the speed that verticalized application is shipping great product. So really our only risk now is the speed at which we can ship product. That is it. And that comes from the speed that we learn and the speed that we can ultimately write code. So stay very close to the customer. Ideally, you want the code and the customer to be as close together as possible.
Love it. Well, listen, we'll stop it there. Let me ask just 2 questions with like kind of rapid fire. When was the moment when you personally felt like you found true product market fit?
When we were having to push customers' start dates back and they were getting upset.
And what would be like your top advice, having gone through 3 startups, for like a founder in that early stage looking for product market fit?
Perseverance, for sure. Not blind perseverance, but perseverance.
Chaz, thanks so much for sharing the story, man. It's been great.
Amazing. Thanks so much, buddy.
Wow, what an episode. You're probably in awe. You're in absolute shock. You're like, that helped me so much. So guess what? Now it's your turn to help someone else. Share the episode in the WhatsApp group you have with founders. Share it on that Slack channel. send it to your founder friends and help them out. Trust me, they will love you for it.